Thank you very much, Vicky. Welcome everyone to this Valentine's Day marketing taster session. And I think it's a brilliant occasion, pun intended, to celebrate Valentine's Day the marketing way. And in this session, we will explore how diamonds, love, and engagement rings became associated with each other and what has marketing to do with that. As with all of my sessions, I like them to be very interactive. So I will ask you to come with me on the virtual shopping tour to start with. And following that, we will be exploring the campaign around love and engagement rings in the context of in the context of the Valentine's Day theme for today. And we will conclude this session by looking into a seminar kind of activity where we will interact to develop a strategy to apply what we will have learned in this session. So for anyone who has not met me yet, my name is Dr. Ekaterina Rindt. I'm a lecturer in strategic and digital marketing at Lancaster University Management School. My teaching and research is primarily centered around strategic, business and digital marketing. And formerly I've completed my PhD at Lancaster University, and before that gained work experience mostly in Germany in marketing communications and risk and crisis management. Apart from my role for Lancaster University, I'm also the external examiner for the MBA at Cranfield, and I'm also part-time a visiting lecturer at the International School of Management in Germany. So before we even start with exploring this, exploring the theme of today, let us go shopping together. And if you scan this QR code, it will take you to a place where you can choose which kind of stone you would buy for your engagement ring. Be that an engagement ring that you want to gift for someone, your significant other, or the engagement ring that you wish to receive. So it's anonymous. It's a very simple experience. Just scan the QR code or follow the instructions that you will find in the chat. And I'm going to follow you to see how your shopping goes. I'm just changing my screen to get to our very interesting. So we have two people who would prefer diamond, one who would prefer sapphire, and one who would buy aquamarine. That is, I'm just thinking if there's anyone else who has not voted yet. So we are going to give this a few seconds. So 3 for diamonds, 2 sapphires, and 1 aquamarine. I also wanted to give you the option of choosing something completely different, but I was not sure what your preference might be, so you would have also the chance to shop for something else. Wonderful. Let us take this knowledge on board as we are exploring this issue further. I'm just going to share back to my slide. So part of our session today will be to understand how did we come to have a predominant preference for diamond stones in engagement rings. This is not something that has actually occurred naturally to humans to consider this as their preference. There is quite a fascinating story of myths and ritual creation on behalf of marketing and on behalf of other stakeholders who are part of that market creation exercise. So what we are going to do in today's session is to first discover why and how diamonds became the symbol of engagement rings. We are going to look behind the scenes of what was devised as the greatest marketing campaign of the 20th century, and predominantly it will show us the power of myths and rituals and marketing strategy. And as part of this, I would love to introduce you to the concept of market creation. And finally, we will explore the new challenge together, and that is we will hopefully help De Beers, which is a diamond processing retailing company, sustain the empire. So when we look into what is marketing, I find it quite fascinating if we just start with a simple definition to see that it actually shapes very much our understanding of what we believe marketing to be and what we sometimes miss out on in marketing. So when we look at marketing, and we take this most recent definition of the Chartered Institute of Marketing, it suggests that it is the management process responsible for anticipating, identifying, and satisfying customer requirements profitably. Now, I've highlighted a lot of things in red for a purpose, and that is that, firstly, what this definition omits is that from a marketing perspective, it's not always about anticipating and identifying ready-made or readily available customer needs and requirements. In a lot of cases, the actual work of a marketing manager is to create a market. And the better we become at creating a market, the more we are likely to succeed in highly saturated markets, as well as in very competitive or new markets. The second problem with this definition is that it typically focuses on one stakeholder, and that is the customer. Yet in this session, we will explore how many different stakeholders must be managed in strategic marketing to enable this process and mobilize the process of market creation. What is also interesting here that we speak here just of requirements, and it's important to differentiate between utilitarian and hedonic requirements. Utilitarian requirements are typically related to a functional need. If I'm hungry and I'm buying a sandwich, I'm satisfying a functional need. If I'm buying a diamond ring, probably it's not exactly a very functional need, and it is serving a different purpose. It can satisfy an emotional need. It can simply be there for the purpose of delivering pleasure. So there are many hedonic needs that are served with marketing. And finally, probably one of the most critical things around this definition is that it finishes on profitability. Yet, as we will progress in our conversation today, probably what it should be saying as well is that it is about satisfying these customer requirements profitably and sustainably. And probably sustainability is something that needs to go even first before profit in order to actually be able to sustain profitability in itself. So what is interesting about market creation is that there is a very good quote by Regis McKenna that I really love, and I think if you take something away from this session, let us make it this quote, and it is that marketing should focus on market creation, not market sharing. And I think it's a very strategically creative exercise to create a market. Yet, if you look into textbooks on marketing, market creation does not typically get much attention. There is no chapter on market creation. We typically rely on textbooks that have been produced in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, North America, that have been very much shaped by the industry of fast-moving consumer goods and the experience of the time of the American economic boom, as well as the experience of a mass market approach. And this mass market fast-moving consumer goods approach strategy has proliferated a lot of different tools that we are using as marketers, and has also significantly shaped our understanding of how we respond to customer needs. So it is time for us to move beyond this textbook and look into market creation from a very different angle. And to do so, I would like to embark with you into the depths of how diamonds were mined, how diamonds were becoming more and more symbolic in their power in signifying eternal love, commitment, loyalty, celebrating love in all its shapes, and becoming the symbol of engagement rings. So if you look into the history of diamond mining, what is very interesting is that until the 1880s, there was actually very little available in terms of mining for diamonds, and the majority of diamonds were at that point indeed very rare. Sorry, not the majority, but it was very difficult to come across diamonds. And only with the discovery of mines, diamond mines in South Africa and other African countries, and throughout the beginning of the 20th century, the supply of diamonds has significantly increased. It was also a market that was significantly dominated by monopolistic company structures, and in that case, it was actually De Beers who was at that time controlling 90% of the world's rough diamond production and distribution. But only when the company was taken over by the Oppenheimer family, which was a German family who migrated to South Africa, the company became an empire. What you can see on this slide is more or less the structure of De Beers today. And what you can see is that the De Beers group of companies is actually formed by two stakeholders. One is the Anglo-American, owning 85%, and the other one is the government of the Republic of Botswana with 15%. It is quite a rare occurrence of having a joint venture between a corporation and a government. But what it also shows is that in today's lecture, we are focusing mostly on this box of diamonds in the jewelry trade and retail market. We will not touch upon the actual corporate structure of De Beers, but it is interesting to see on this slide in how far their business is fully integrated from the mining, the exploration, the processing, the trade of rough diamonds, and then also, of course, the processing and manufacturing of jewelry, as well as the retail. So when we look into how did diamonds become the symbol of engagement rings, we are embarking onto the greatest marketing campaign of the 20th century. What is interesting is that at the beginning of the 20th century, there were a few major forces revolutionizing the industry. On the one hand, there were increasingly new mines discovered, and it has increased supply and threatened to devalue diamonds. At the same time, where there was an increased supply of diamonds, there was also the Great Depression in the US, but also it had sparked a few effects onto other countries. And in the 1930s, the demand for diamonds was at an all-time low. So consumers at that point also regarded diamonds as only one of many options. So we have the three forces of low demand, consumers considering other options. The market actually already existed for engagement rings, and it was perfectly acceptable to give engagement rings that were studded with a sapphire, aquamarine, turquoise, all sorts of other stones, and amongst them were diamonds. But it was not necessarily regarded as the only or the more valuable option for an engagement ring. So what happened in the beginning of the 1930s, apart from the Great Depression, is that Harry Oppenheimer, who was the son of Ernest Oppenheimer, he traveled to the US to engage the advertising agency N.W. Ayer. And he wanted to engage with them to raise the demand for diamonds. At that time, De Beers was on the way to create the market and the demand for the whole industry. It would make sense at that time because De Beers was owning the absolute majority in diamond jewelry trade. So they were a very monopolistic power on the market, and they were trying to really advance this kind of understanding that diamond rings or diamond stones were the only option and should be the preferred option for engagement rings. So they have engaged N.W. Ayer, and this agency came up with the slogan, "A diamond is forever." Apart from that, they have created a very intricate market creation campaign. And as you can see on the right-hand side, these were the kinds of ads that were targeted primarily at men, trying to educate them about the value of diamonds and trying to position diamonds as a symbol of their devotion, commitment, love, and other associations they had with the kind of precious stone and the rarity associated with diamonds. But beyond this campaign, actually De Beers did not stop. Of course, they had also relied on very strong corporate consolidation, and they had artificially decreased the supply of diamonds when they noticed that the demand was not meeting the supply to keep it at a very high price point. So what happened next is, from today's point of view, probably very would be very familiar to most of us who are in the marketing world, and that is De Beers has engaged very strongly in product placement. So throughout the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, until even now with the Cruella Disney movie, they have very strongly engaged in product placement, and some of the most popular examples are the Marilyn Monroe movies, where they had essentially created this diamond information center, which was completely owned by De Beers, and their job was to inject diamonds into romantic movie scenes by rewriting these scenes, staging them, supplying the diamonds, as well as, this was also the job of the Diamond Information Center, to gift diamonds to selected celebrities, especially for the Met Gala, the Oscars, and other high-profile events that received a lot of publicity. And they were planting diamonds as to be considered the trend in conversations with fashion designers. So essentially, when there was a radio show where fashion designers were supposed to discuss the most recent trends, they were briefed to advocate for diamonds to become the next big thing in fashion. So De Beers designed also a weekly service called the Hollywood Personalities, and they were providing 120 leading newspapers with the stories, the pictures, and essentially the whole package that they would love these newspapers to report. This is, in today's world, a very, I would say, comprehensive campaign in public relations. And finally, and this is probably one of the most interesting bits, they have also strongly engaged in consumer education. On the one hand, they had those ads, as you have seen, with the man pictured inspecting a diamond, which was supposed to educate men about the different sizes, the different value associated with diamonds. And at the same time, they were launching an actual educational campaign in high schools. And these were lectures on diamonds to advance the engagement ring tradition. Obviously, they did not label it as advancing the engagement ring tradition, but they were visiting high schools across the United States to deliver classes to high school students, educating them about the value of diamonds, how they are mined, how they are assessed, how rare they are, and what is their main purpose in the life of a female. So these efforts came hand in hand with the strategy which is known as artification of a commodity in that case. So De Beers had placed diamonds next to paintings of Picasso, Dali, and Dufy, suggesting that diamonds are as unique, timeless, and invaluable as art. And apart from doing this through magazine adverts, they were still very much engaged in sponsoring arts events. And if you look at the right-hand side of this the slide, you will see De Beers jewelry and the parts of their shops, depending on which location you're in, they're designing either pop-up shops or they're designing art galleries to include diamonds as in between or as part of that exhibition. The main aim of that approach is, of course, to place diamonds on par with art. And the beauty of that argument is that, firstly, art is typically immune to critique. It's considered unique and timeless, and it's considered something that it should be treasured for a lifetime, ideally not resold. But this is something that De Beers has developed further in their engagement ring campaign. So what is really interesting in terms of how De Beers had shaped this campaign is that they have moved beyond the US market, which was their main focus, and they had expanded into Europe, Japan, and China. And especially Japan and China were very difficult markets for them because of some of the traditions that were associated with engagements and weddings in those cultures. However, we can see from these charts that within a certain span of years, granted, this is quite a long time, within 50 years, within 30 years, within 16 years, the tradition has, however, really proliferated that culture. And today, 77, it's actually more than 77% of the Japanese market, more than 77% of the diamond rings sold on the Japanese market are for engagement ring purposes. The same is true across the other countries. An increasingly growing market for diamonds and engagement rings is India. In terms of the US market, it's around 88% at the moment. So they have really sustained their market power and are growing, still growing. So De Beers did not stop at engagement rings. As you can imagine, they had been struggling with one thing, and that is while their exercise in creating diamond engagement rings has been a massive boost to this whole industry, there's one problem with engagement rings, and that is that typically engagement rings contain only one diamond, and secondly, ideally it's something that is gifted only once in a lifetime, and it's typically also not resold or regifted. So essentially, they did not have a lot of purchasing opportunities. However, at the same time, they had an increasing supply of diamonds, especially smaller stones. So they had an increasing supply of smaller stones, partly because new mines were discovered, but also because the mining technique became better. On top of that, De Beers finally experienced some competition, primarily from Australian mining companies and Russian mining companies. So what they came up with is known as the Freestone Anniversary Ring. And it was marketed as for your past, present, and future. And it was designed to absorb the surplus of smaller diamonds. Some of the campaigns you can see associated with this Freestone Anniversary Ring said things like, "She already knows you love her, now everyone else will too." And it also said, "Every 1,000 years or so, it's nice to get her something really special." So the campaigns were really building kind of a pressure upon male buyers to show affection, devotion through purchasing more diamonds. This has worked quite well for De Beers, but it had not solved still the growing problem of a surplus of smaller diamonds. So can anyone guess what they did next? If you can guess something, please put it into the chat. Because they obviously had this amazing idea of creating the Freestone diamond ring, but they were still having a lot of surplus diamonds. I can't see the chat on my screen yet, but if Vicky would let me know if there's anything, someone has an idea of what De Beers did next.
We've had one suggestion of sell diamond necklaces to use smaller diamonds.
Oh, that's a very interesting idea. Actually, they did produce, obviously as part of their jewelry collection, they did have necklaces with diamonds, but they were quite set on this idea of it having to be a kind of ring.
Yeah.
So
we've also had someone suggested the quadruple ring, and someone else has suggested bigger jewelry, and anniversary rings or friendship rings is also suggested.
Very good. We will definitely recycle some of these ideas as we are moving towards the case study we're going to solve together. You are definitely on the right track in terms of quadruple rings, just adding more diamonds. So De Beers went full on, and they have created the so-called Eternity Ring. The Eternity Ring is known to have the diamonds studded all around the ring, and it was marketed in the way you can see here. It said, "You once said I do, now you can say I'm glad I did." Again, really emphasizing the kind of pressure to express your love for diamonds, and the more diamonds and the bigger the diamonds, the better. Of course, there was a whole calculus of marketing strategy behind it. And on top of that, because the Eternity Ring did not do the job completely, they still had this kind of problem with not selling enough diamond-studded rings. They have also created the right-hand ring. So this really plays on the idea that someone suggested the friendship rings or anniversary rings, but this one did not even involve any other person anymore. It was supposed to be bought by the female herself, and it was basically designed to enhance sales to women. Until now, predominantly all the diamond-studded rings were sold to men, so they would be gifted to women on special occasions, engagements, anniversaries, the Eternity Ring, the past, present, future ring. And now they had created the campaign that was supposed to encourage women to buy these rings for themselves, and it was called the right-hand ring, suggesting that the left hand is already occupied with the engagement ring, so now you have one hand left, and you could get yourself this ring, which was symbolic of self-love, self-appreciation, and essentially this idea of female empowerment. And it always had this tagline, "Women of the world, raise your right hand." So this was I would say, probably the peak phase of De Beers exploring every single angle of how to sell more diamond rings and to a greater share of the market more often, and to really tackle their problem of surplus diamonds, especially the surplus production of smaller diamonds. Now, the challenges did not end here. And what we are going to do now is I'm going to quickly explore with you the mechanisms of marketing strategy that have been behind this case, and that I think will be useful to you if at some point in future you would like to explore the exercise of market creation in a different context. I think it might also help you to become more aware as a consumer yourself, because there are countless examples, not just diamonds, of where we become subject to an industry-created ritual that keeps us consuming things that might or might not be to our advantage. Following this theoretical part, I will invite you to help De Beers rebuild or maintain its empire. And we will be looking into some of the challenges that De Beers is experiencing at this stage, and hopefully you will have a few more ideas on how we can help them out. So how are new markets created? I think these explanations will make a lot of sense to you following this case study that we have just discussed. And typically there are two approaches. The first one is to fulfill an unmet need. Typically, this presupposes that there is an existing unmet need, and this need must be simply discovered and served well. And success and failure in this case depend on given consumer demand. Now, if you look into the diamond market ring at the beginning of the 20th century, there was definitely no need for more stones, more jewelry, or for diamonds in particular. The people were very happy gifting engagement rings with different kinds of stones, and there was really no demand. It was a saturated, well-served market. Now, if you look into deliberate need creation, it takes a different approach. It presupposes that we deliberately engage in market creation as a political and social process. So we do not assume that markets pre-exist. The demand is not simply given. If you want to sell more diamonds on the market, you may need to create that space for yourself, and you may need to somehow make sure that the consumers perceive you as being the superior solution to their need. So this need must often be manufactured. And in this case, multiple stakeholders are mobilized in creating markets. If you think about the diamond case, we had the media, celebrities, the Diamond Information Center, a lot of stakeholders who were managing the diamond supply chain within the De Beers or under the De Beers umbrella. And also all the people who were mobilized to deliver the diamond lectures in high schools, as well as the radio programs. There were many stakeholders who helped co-create the myth and the ritualization of engagement rings to contain diamonds. The success and failure in deliberate need creation typically depend on legitimization, and we can say it's about acceptance of the idea, the product, or the service by multiple stakeholders. In theoretical terms, in academia, we call this exercise mega marketing. It is an actual term to describe how markets are created. And I think the De Beers campaign is probably one of the most powerful examples of showing how mega marketing works. If we were to illustrate this diamond market and how mega marketing is applied, we would have to look beyond the two typical stakeholders that are displayed here in gray boxes, and that is consumers and companies. Most textbooks look at consumers and companies as the two main stakeholders and blend out the rest. But it is very important to look into what is the role of public organizations, such as the Gem and Jewelry Export Promotion Council, for example. What are industry associations doing, such as the International Diamond Manufacturer Association? There are also NGOs who are playing a very important role, especially in the last 20 years or so. And we have to look into what is the work of Diamond Development, the Diamond Development Initiative, or Amnesty USA, and also their consumer activist groups. So we need to think about how these different stakeholders influence the market and how our market creation exercise is going to create acceptance for the idea amongst the key stakeholders who we want to influence. So the question is, how do these actors co-create, sustain, and develop profitable and sustainable markets? And in academic terms, we would call this exercise mega marketing. So this is how these stakeholders co-create markets. And mega marketing is defined as the coordinated strategic effort to influence regulative, normative, and cultural cognitive institutions. Typically, the goal of mega marketing is to establish legitimacy, we call it acceptance, for an idea, practice, product, or service. In this case, in the diamond case, the idea was that diamonds are the only acceptable and the only desirable stone to feature on an engagement ring. And secondly, that engagement rings must be part of the ritual of a proper love relationship, and it must be something that is highly treasured and therefore has to be very high in price. And it has even led De Beers to suggest that it has a 1-month salary rule, and then it was a 3-month salary rule. So essentially they tried to benchmark the prices of a diamond engagement ring to the average salary of US male population. Typically, when we look into the actual practices of mega marketing, we are speaking of lobbying, negotiation, and strategic partnering. legal action, as well as PR and advertising. Of course, PR and advertising tend to be the ones that are most studied by marketing scholars. And in the De Beers case, we can see that there was definitely a mixture of all of these strategies. They have lobbied the governments in order to allow that monopoly to build and to restrict certain trades or to facilitate certain trades, as well as gaining access to mines, controlling mines in remote countries. There was also obviously a lot of legal action going on with regards to antitrust allegations, as well as negotiating the supply chain of diamonds, especially the trade of rough diamonds. So when we look into how this kind of ritual is created, we should look at ritualization as a strategic approach in marketing. It is not something that is given or necessarily historically grown. It is actually something that we manufacture as marketing professionals. And possibly some of you might be surprised to see in this flow chart above that apart from other days that we might be very familiar with have a very strong marketing influence, such as Halloween, Valentine's Day, very topical, but also Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is not a historically, culturally, or religiously grown national holiday in the US. It is something that has been advanced by Sarah Gale, who was the editor of Godey's magazine. So she was, in that case, the kind of industry champion for that holiday and for the institution of celebrating Thanksgiving as a family, as a nationwide holiday. So similarly to that, we can map out how the tradition of gifting engagement rings, and especially engagement rings that were studded with a diamond, became an exercise in creating a ritual on the market. So firstly, typically there is a designated time and space. And in that case, it's supposed to be the engagement occasion. Of course, it is chosen by every couple individually, but even there, De Beers tried to steer them to think of Christmas and New Year's. And we will see some of their campaigns around that in a minute. Secondly, when we create a ritual, there is typically a champion who is really promoting the idea. In this case, it was De Beers who were doing this on behalf of the whole industry. Typically, there is also an ideological value, something of universal appeal, something that is that you cannot possibly critique because it's associated with very high morals, values, something that typically has a universal appeal to everyone. And in that case, it is the association of diamond and engagement rings with the values of love, loyalty, commitment, exclusivity, eternity, and truth. And finally, there's typically an industry sponsor. In that case, actually, it's not just corporate businesses that were sponsoring this, as in De Beers itself, Alrosa, the Russian diamond manufacturer, or Rio Tinto. It's also governments. In this case, a lot of African governments, as well as governments of Australia, Russia, and Brazil, were involved in lobbying for the trade of diamonds and the restricted supply of diamonds. So this is kind of the template that marketing professionals use to create a ritual on the market that we tend to, after some time, especially after a few decades of consistent messaging, adopt as a ritual and sometimes as something that is culturally and historically considered to be part of our upbringing, part of our culture, part of sense making. So when we look into the actual model of how rituals are created, it's quite interesting to see that it typically starts with marketing and media working together. In this case, we are aware of how De Beers has worked with the media, has provided them with the stories, the material, the pictures, the videos, the movies, everything that they needed to accept diamonds as the only choice for engagement rings and the necessity for engagement rings in the first place. Typically, there is a creation of this brand narrative or cultural myths, and it has been quite intertwined with this idea of diamonds being rare, unique, very valuable, and therefore to transfer the values that were associated with the diamonds onto the relationship that humans should put on love and their whole romantic relationship. Typically, this is designed to produce certain consumer perceptions. So this was, of course, very much emphasized in the kind of narratives that have proliferated, the stories around engagement occasions, how this is celebrated by the family, by loved ones, and how it is supposed to be symbolic of the kind of fairy tale love relationship. And then there is, of course, the ritual evolution. And in terms of ritual evolution, it speaks typically of certain nuances that are introduced over time to sustain and maintain the ritual as consumer demands, as cultural norms may shift. So, as I mentioned before, De Beers tried to really micromanage the kind of engagement occasion by suggesting that it should be ideally orchestrated over Christmas or New Year's. It should be 1 or 2 or 3 salaries as to define the ideal cost of the diamond ring. And there were several other ways in which they tried to influence the way we shape our shape and display romantic engagements. So, of course, part of this whole exercise was also continued consumer education. And it's not just consumer education, but also the control of diamond dealers and diamond jewelry retailers. For that reason, De Beers had partnered with LVMH. Some of you may be familiar with this as probably the biggest luxury conglomerate on the planet. And they had partnered with LVMH to build the De Beers jewelry retail stores. They have since left this partnership on mutual grounds. However, for several years, this has really helped De Beers to capitalize on the kind of luxury strategy knowledge that LVMH had, as well as access and expertise in the retail world. So ritualization is probably one of the key approaches in market creation that has proliferated, not just the diamond market, but also many other markets. And to give you an example, if you are aware of the increased use of sunscreen, that's a brilliant way of looking into how sometimes our everyday lives are impacted by ritualization. A few decades ago, sunscreen was maybe available, but we were by far not as aware as we are now of it. By now, the industry would like us to apply sunscreen every day, even if you're inside, apply factor 50, regardless of the weather. And while there may be scientific evidence behind it, there's definitely also a lot of market push to make you replace these products as often as possible and to really alert you to essentially the fact of what missing out on sunscreen can do to your health. This is just an example to show that ritualization is not exclusive to certain high-end events or to the luxury industry, or in any way is not exclusive to De Beers. It is something that has proliferated many of our consumer practices in many areas of our lives. So let us now move to my favorite part, and that is our interactive case study. And I would like you to together with me and with others who are joining in this webinar to help De Beers in recreating the diamond market. So we are looking here at Céline Assimon, who is the CEO of De Beers Jewelers, and she's facing a few challenges. And some of these challenges are firstly that there is increased supply of naturally mined diamonds. Secondly, De Beers is by far not the monopoly power on the market anymore, and it was outdone by Alrosa, which is a Russian diamond mining and retailing company. And secondly, there is also quite a strong proliferation of synthetic diamonds. Some of you might be familiar with the term lab-grown diamonds. So this is something that has really impacted the industry. De Beers sales are okay, but they have definitely suffered some of their fall in market share, and they are not doing as well as they used to in the past. So the question is, how can we help them to maintain their empire? And we will look into a few bits of information to give you a bit more background about how these trends are emerging. And once you have absorbed this background information, we will discuss how to design a campaign to help De Beers sustain their performance. So firstly, to give you an overview in terms of the competition we have, unfortunately or fortunately, it's not 1902 anymore, and we have a few bigger players on the market, and De Beers is not necessarily holding its place as market leader. As we can see here, Alrosa is the Russian diamond mining company, and they are primarily mining in Russia, but also they have bought mines in Angola, Botswana, and Zimbabwe. And we can see that compared to the other competition here, they have one of of the biggest portfolios of mining operations. Given that there are also other players, including Rio Tinto, Dominion Diamond, and Petra Diamonds, it means that generally there are quite a lot of diamonds on the market. So there's an oversupply and an oversupply of smaller diamonds. If you look into some of the key players, it's only to illustrate that primarily, although they are mining in different countries, in terms of their retail and the stores and as well as the diamond broker organizations, they're primarily placed in the main cities around the world. So we have Toronto, London, Moscow, Mumbai, of course, a few places in South Africa as well, but primarily it's those countries. So I just wanted to give you an impression of where is your market and where are the mining operations. Further to what we've seen, there was definitely some trouble on the horizon with regards to mining natural diamonds. And this has been flagged in particular by the movie called Blood Diamonds. It featured in 2015 and it was hugely popular, not least thanks to Leonardo DiCaprio featuring in there. And a few other books and media publications came out, including a documentary on Blood Diamonds, a book called Facets of Power, a book called Conflict Diamonds, Blood Diamonds, and Time magazine was reporting quite comprehensively on this issue. So this idea of blood diamonds was shedding light on the very unethical, unsustainable mining practices and how diamonds became the currency to fuel civil war, all sorts of, not just civil war, but all sorts of war, human trafficking, and a lot of other serious issues with regards to to the conditions that were experienced in the countries where diamonds were mined. Of course, this has created a very significant impact on the trade with diamonds and the perception of diamonds as part of such a special occasion as engagements. So this came to compound the situation that De Beers was experiencing at this time. And in addition to that, they also had competition from synthetic diamonds. And what you can see here is advertising from a few of the most popular synthetic diamond manufacturers. And essentially what you can see here is a definite change in kind of the associated colors. It's all green and transparent and looks very healthy. And the CEO of Gemesis Corporation, which is one of the leading synthetic diamond producers, he said the mystique of natural diamonds has been built by the industry. 150 million carats of mined diamonds are produced every year, so they're really not that special if you look at those terms. And what is interesting about this is that the synthetic diamond industry has definitely been growing quite significantly over the past years. However, while it has been growing, and here we can see just a quite steady growth over the past years, especially jumping towards since the 2020. What is very interesting is that still there's quite a strong perception that synthetic diamonds are not as good as naturally mined diamonds. So this is something to the advantage of De Beers, who are still heavily capitalizing on their mining and production of natural diamonds. I wanted to give you a bit of background here with regards to consumer behavior pressures. And we can see here that firstly, still the majority of consumers believe that diamonds have intrinsic value. And this idea, however, needs to be solidified. So De Beers constantly needs to invest and reinvest in making this idea the predominant one. There is increasingly competition from other luxury goods, and there has definitely been competition in terms of what consumers are willing to spend their money on, in terms of luxury experiences, in terms of other ways of spending their money instead of luxury jewelry or diamond jewelry. And there has been a shift towards sustainable consumerism, and that is consumers value more products that have a positive social impact and have zero environmental harm. So this whole conversation around blood diamonds has necessarily impacted the perception of diamonds as being not as pure and as desired and probably as conflict-free as they would like to be. So lab-grown diamonds are, despite being extremely sustainable and regarded as a full-on alternative to naturally mined diamonds, they are considered to be less less favored by consumers. So what we see here is that although when purchasing diamonds, sustainability concerns can be a deal breaker for consumers. So it shows that yes, they are concerned about sustainability. When it comes to lab-grown diamonds, the majority of consumers think that it's associated with fake values. It's typically associated with something synthetic, therefore not very unique, cheap, not valuable, poor quality. Some of them praise the scientific advances behind being able to produce a synthetic diamond, but predominantly the sentiment is that lab-grown diamonds are not necessarily the real deal for such a special occasion as an engagement. So having looked into this background of market pressures, considering there are several competitors on the diamond market, the proliferation of synthetic diamonds, which grows in production and increasingly really tries to cement its way into the diamond market in terms of jewelry, and the idea that there is certainly some work to do with regards to resolving the issue around conflict diamonds. The question is, can we develop a market creation idea and a tagline to convey the key message De Beers should emphasize to sustain their position on the market? So we have a few minutes available, and I would just like to ask you to put down in the chat, what do you think should be De Beers' next move? You can put it down as an idea of what you think they should promote as an idea, maybe a new ritual that comes to your mind, or a campaign that is going to emphasize emphasize or not their production of natural diamonds. What do you think they should do with regards to synthetic diamonds, if you have an idea on that? So it's really up to you and how you want to approach this, but I think we have enough knowledge from this session to put together something around how to help De Beers sustain their position on the market. I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about this, and I'm going to move on after we will have discussed this to a few slides to show you what I recommend you could watch on Valentine's Day, and also to direct you towards careers at De Beers. So I'm seeing that someone suggested anniversary rings or friendship rings. Oh, that's probably from the first from the first interaction. So it would be great if you can put down in the chat ideas that you have for sustaining the position on the market for De Beers.
So someone has commented, give some of the profits to good causes in the mining countries.
Yep. That's actually really addressing a very hot topic for De Beers, who have been pioneering the Kimberley process. Some of you might be aware of this Kimberley process and the certificates associated with that. They have tried to do this. They are still on the case of trying to invest in actual sustainable practices, but it's definitely something where they need to strengthen their position, because to be honest, the conflict diamond issue is by far not resolved. Kimberley process is a good start, but it's not fully resolving the issues of war in some African countries.
But some other thoughts have come in. So someone says the demand for authentic diamonds is obviously decreasing, so they could reflect that in their prices. I suppose the question then is, would consumers consider a cheaper diamond to be of lower quality, maybe?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, actually, I was able to see the chat on my phone. I was thinking that Harry suggested this thing that you read out, Vicky. It's interesting that if the demand for, if demand for authentic diamonds is decreasing, it might be the natural way for De Beers to maintain their prices in order to not signal that actually naturally mined diamonds are not as valuable as they were considered to be for decades and decades. I'm also seeing that I think Flynn posted play on the preconceptions, maybe a tagline like, if your love is real, make sure your ring is, or something like that. I really like this approach. I think this real love, real diamonds is something that really conveys the authenticity. It plays on the idea that if something comes from the lab, it's probably reproducible, therefore it's not unique, therefore it can be replicated a million times. So something that maybe people don't want to feel associated within their romantic relationship. They don't want to be considered replaceable. So I think this is definitely a great idea with the, if your love is real, make sure your ring is. I'm also seeing here that Eloise has posted use blockchain to track the source of diamonds when a customer purchases a diamond. To tackle blood diamond issues and traceability. That's actually a really amazing idea in terms of how to integrate the new digital advances into a very tricky supply chain. I think what this might result in is that it will definitely help in assuring the authenticity and the ethical trade of traded diamonds. It will probably still leave room for conflict diamonds to be traded, but at least you have the option of verifying where the particular purchase you are making is coming from. We also have Shannon saying, focus on how these are naturally produced and that they are forever, associating with the long period of time it takes for the diamonds to form. And the partners care for each other that much that they want to share something long-lasting and long-formed with them. I think this whole narrative that you managed to create around the uniqueness, the rarity, the process of how diamonds are formed, and that the only real diamonds correspond to real love, is definitely a narrative that would favor De Beers at this stage. I'm going to disclose one thing they have actually done about synthetic diamonds because I found this an incredibly smart and funny way of disarming the opponent. So firstly, De Beers has created their own sub-brand marketing synthetic diamonds as well. And it's called Lightbox. But what they have also done on top of that is they have flooded the market with these Lightbox synthetic diamonds at a very low price, which makes it quite hard for their competitors to justify why their lab-grown diamonds are much more expensive. What De Beers wanted to ensure here is that there is going to be a very significant price difference between synthetic and natural diamonds, to use price as a proxy for how valuable that stone is. So I just felt it was quite interesting to see that De Beers has tapped into the synthetic diamond market for the purpose of, on the one hand, having a share in it, on the other hand, to ensure that it's not growing as successfully as it could without someone flooding the market with cheap lab-grown diamonds. I'm going to finish our little session by suggesting that if you're interested in working in this industry, De Beers has quite some amazing job opportunities. This is just one example for a marketing role. And as you can see here, what they're trying to do, as do many luxury and jewelry manufacturers and retailers in the recent couple of years, thanks to COVID, everyone is trying to enhance their digital presence. So they're particularly looking at someone to help with their global e-commerce growth program, and it's related to creating a digital customer experience and managing their e-commerce platform. Safe to say, diamonds have never been really strong on the e-commerce side, simply because it's considered to be something so expensive, so special, that you would not probably want to go online and check out in a minute, leaving a few thousand pounds behind. But it's something that has been definitely at the forefront of many retailers who were going through the lockdown period and through a decrease in demand, not least due to the lower economic capacity of the population across several countries following COVID. Also, as promised, I wanted to share with you a few recommendations you can enjoy on Valentine's Day or any time. I do recommend watching the movie Blood Diamonds, and if you prefer less entertainment, more information, there's also a documentary called Blood Diamonds. It's linked on the slide, and I'm happy to share the link if you want in the chat later. There are actually a lot of interesting very recent documentaries on conflict diamonds and blood diamonds that you can also watch for free on YouTube. I think it's a fascinating topic to see how complex the trade is and how complex some of the structures are politically, economically, socially, that give diamonds the power to be a vehicle to fuel conflict and to really cost a lot of human lives who have never had anything to do with this trade. So I think it's a very deep encounter with some of the structures of countries that we may not be as familiar with as with some economies in the West. And I think it's a really interesting exploration of how marketing has tapped into creating a ritual that is taken for granted now, and that has really shaped, I think, a lot of our ideas and thoughts on what an engagement occasion should look like, and why we should care about it as much as we do. So on that note, I hope you have enjoyed the session. If you would like to explore anything I have touched on in this session in more detail, you're welcome to contact me via email. What you see on this final slide is actually a really beautiful place in Lancaster. It's called the Ashton Memorial. It's considered to be the declaration of love of Mr. Williamson to his wife, to his late wife, and he built this kind of building as a mausoleum when she died. And it's quite an interesting place to visit if you ever come to Lancaster. I highly recommend.